Load lines, they are permanent markings on the side of larger ships that indicate how deep you're allowed to load the vessels. As we see on the figure here, you have several load lines, and which of these apply depends on where and when the passage is to be performed. Draft and freeboard, they are of course connected. The greater the draft, the smaller the freeboard, and the larger the freeboard is, the more extra buoyancy do you have, and thus a greater margin of safety. So more freeboard, more spare buoyancy, larger margins of safety. So we see that we load the ship further down, we have less freeboard, and in a tropical zone, abbreviated T, you can load the ship deeper than in a winter zone W, which is of course because the weather is statistically better in the tropics, and the consequences of sinking in the tropics are somewhat smaller than in the North Atlantic in the winter. For smaller cargo vessels, they don't have multiple loading lines like this, they just have one downloading line, and then the regulations on load lines are found in the regulations on constructions and supervision of small cargo ships, and the maximum downloading is indicated by simple lines on both sides, and we'll have a look at an example here. And we see the downloading line there evidently marked on the ship side on both sides. Load line marks. Initially the ships just received one load line on either side, which indicated the maximum allowed downloading. But then over time the system was expanded with more lines depending on the geographical location and the time of year. Generally, as mentioned previously, the weather is worse in winter and the chance of surviving a sinking is slimmer. This is why we want to have more margin of safety in the winter. And to keep track of which loading line that applies to your ship, you have seasonal zone charts. If the valid load line is submerged, the ship is overloaded and is by definition not seaworthy. And it's your responsibility as captain to make sure that you don't set out to sea with a vessel that is not fully seaworthy in all respects. And if you have a voyage that transits through several seasonal zones, you must never load the vessel more than to the strictest load line requirement. A load line chart looks like this, and we can see clearly tropical zones, summer zones. We also see some winter areas, seasonal zones. So it's a little bit complicated if you're going back and forth across the Atlantic all through the year, but as long as you stay in Norwegian waters, not too tricky.